Stage 2, Nightfall in the Heartland, continued. Midday reckonings. By late morning, the prairie heat had begun to shimmer, and Caleb drove his aging pickup to the co-op for supplies. The gravel road rattled beneath the tires, every bump echoing through the cab like a muted drumbeat. Inside the feed store, fluorescent lights hummed, and the air smelled of grain and motor oil. A few neighbours were already there, their own faces drawn from long nights of patrol. Lost another 10 acres, muttered James Holloway, tipping his hat back. They rooted through my soy like it was a buffet. Got the county trapper coming, but you know how that goes. Caleb nodded grimly. They're smarter than we give them credit for. One miss, and they don't come near a trap again. At the counter, the clerk weighed 50-pound sacks of seed. State's talking about expanding the bounty, she said. Extra $50 a tail if you bring proof. A weary laugh rippled through the group. Everyone knew bounties rarely tipped the balance. They were chasing shadows, plugging holes in a dam that kept springing new leaks. Lessons from the past. Driving home, Caleb thought of his grandfather, who had fought a different battle. Dust storms during the dirty 30s. Old black and white photos showed gaunt men standing against walls of blowing sand, eyes squinted against grit. Back then, the enemy was the sky itself, but the feeling was the same, an overwhelming force, barely understood, shaping their destiny. His grandfather's journal contained lines that might have been written yesterday. We do not defeat the land. We endure it. We learn its moods. We survive alongside it. Those words steadied Caleb's grip on the steering wheel. The hogs were relentless, but so were the people of this soil. The science underground. That afternoon, Dr. Annika Flores met with her graduate research team at a small field station near Lake Thunderbird. They huddled around laptops, the screens glowing with heat maps that pulsed like living things. Data points plotted every confirmed hog sighting, creating a red bloom across central Oklahoma. Notice the migration corridor here, Annika said, tracing a finger along a glowing arc. They're following creek beds and old railway cuts. Classic edge habitat behavior. Her assistant, Malik, frowned. Even with aerial culls, reproduction outpaces removal. Our model shows a 5% annual increase statewide. Another researcher scrolled through camera trap footage. A sounder of 20 pigs trotting single file across a moonlit meadow, eyes glinting like embers. Each frame carried the unspoken message, we are many and we are coming. Public education's next, Annika said. Landowners need to report sightings immediately. No more piecemeal response. A murmur of agreement circled the room, tinged with frustration. They were scientists chasing an adversary that rewrote the rules with every generation. An evening with the Jennings. As dusk returned, Clara Jennings prepared cornbread in her century-old farmhouse. The smell of baking filled the kitchen where faded wallpaper bore patterns of tiny wildflowers. Her granddaughter Emma, home from college, set the table and listened as Clara recounted another story of hog raids. They've been at it longer than I've been alive, Clara said, sliding the skillet from the oven. I remember nights when your granddaddy and I would hear them out by the peach trees. Sounded like thunder, the way they tore through. Emma stirred her iced tea thoughtfully. Do you ever think they'll stop? Clara smiled, lines deepening around her eyes. Nature doesn't stop. We just learned to dance with it. Sky hunters return. Far above another county line, Andrea's helicopter thundered through twilight once more. Her headset crackled with Marcus's voice. Movement near the south ridge. Heat signature large, maybe a whole sounder. She banked the aircraft hard, the horizon tilting. Below, the prairie unfurled in shades of deep indigo and silver. Through the night vision scope, Marcus spotted shapes breaking from the tree line. Dark silhouettes scattering like spilled ink. "Got them," he said, steadying the rifle. A sharp report split the air. One hog tumbled, then another, while the rest veered into a creek bed. Andrea held the chopper steady against a sudden gust. The adrenaline was familiar now, a tense ballet of machine and instinct. Each successful shot meant fewer ruined fields, fewer sleepless farmers. Yet she knew they were barely trimming the edges of an ever-growing storm. Caleb's quiet vigil. Back on his porch, Caleb listened to the distant thrum of rotors and thought of the fragile line between civilization and wilderness. The night smelled of cedar and turned earth. Brisket lay at his feet, ears twitching at far-off sounds. Caleb poured a finger of bourbon and stared at the stars. He thought of his children, sleeping upstairs, and wondered what kind of Oklahoma they would inherit. Would they remember these battles as a temporary blight, or as the start of a permanent siege? The prairie wind carried no answers, only the low rustle of grass, timeless, unyielding. A reporter arrives. The next morning, a journalist from Tulsa, Mara Newen, arrived with camera gear and a quick, curious smile. She'd heard whispers of the hog war and wanted a ground-level view. Caleb led her through the rutted fields, describing the damage and the endless repairs. She crouched to photograph the deep hoofprints, her lens capturing the chaotic patterns. "Looks like a hurricane passed through," she said. "Feels like it too," Caleb replied. "Except hurricanes leave after a while." Mara interviewed Annika later that day, recording quotes about ecological impact and the need for statewide coordination. Her article, when published, would ignite heated debate across Oklahoma, some demanding harsher measures, others warning against ecological overreach. That evening, a front of rolling thunderheads built over the western sky, streaked with the copper light of sunset. Caleb watched as the first lightning forked across the plains, illuminating miles of wheat like molten gold. Rain would bring brief relief to the drought-stricken fields, but also fresh growth for the hogs to plunder. He felt the storm in his bones, the way farmers do. It wasn't just weather. It was a reminder that the battle for balance never ends. Brisket barked once, sharp and sudden. From the far pasture came a distant grunt, a sound Caleb now recognized instantly. Even with a storm brewing, the invaders were on the move again. He tightened his jaw, set down his coffee, and reached for the rifle propped by the door. End of Chapter 1. The night stretched before him, vast and alive. The prairie's heartbeat thrumming beneath his feet. Tomorrow would bring more decisions, more skirmishes, more stories etched into the land. For now, the fight continued. Quiet, relentless, and deeply human. The river corridor. First light on the Canadian. Mist hung low over the Canadian River, turning the water into a ribbon of silver under the dawn. Along the muddy banks, tracks crisscrossed like a language of their own. Deer, raccoon. And unmistakably, the broad cloven prints of feral hogs. Anika Flores knelt beside one, her gloved fingers tracing the fresh impression. The soil was still damp, the edges crisp. they'd passed through only hours earlier. Behind her, graduate assistant Malik adjusted the GPS unit. "Sounder of at least 15, he murmured, reading from the tablet. "They're hugging the corridor, just like the models predicted." Anika stood, scanning the cottonwoods that lined the river. This stretch of central Oklahoma had become a superhighway for hogs, a natural route that threaded farms, wetlands, and suburban developments. Every mile they moved south meant new fields at risk, a community on edge. 20 minutes away, the small town of Purcell was waking up. At the corner diner, farmers and ranchers crowded booths over steaming mugs of coffee. The talk was all hogs. "Lost a calf last week," said rancher Mike DeWitt, his voice roughened by years of dust and early mornings. "Little one got trampled when a herd cut through the pasture." A murmur of sympathy circled the table. Another farmer, Nora Kim, tapped her phone to show a grainy night vision photo. A dozen hulking shapes rooting in her sorghum. "They were gone before the sheriff even arrived," she said. Sheriff Paula Wright, seated at the counter, turned and gave a weary nod. "We've doubled patrols," she said, "but these animals don't keep schedules. They appear and vanish like smoke." The room fell silent for a beat. Everyone knew the sheriff's words were not resignation, but realism. Into the bottomlands. By mid-morning, Anika and Malik pushed deeper into the riparian forest. A faint game trail led them beneath cottonwoods, where the air smelled of wet bark and river silt. They paused often to photograph fresh rooting sites. Wide, churn circles where hogs had ploughed for grubs and roots. "Each patch like this means hundreds of seedlings lost," Anika said, voice low. "Riparian zones are nurseries for the whole ecosystem. Lose them and erosion accelerates." Malik crouched to collect a soil sample. "You can feel how loose it is," he said, scooping the dark earth into a vial. "One good flood and half this bank will slide." A kingfisher flashed blue across the water, its rattling call a sharp counterpoint to the soft rustle of leaves. The land seemed peaceful, but the evidence underfoot told a story of constant disturbance. The call of the hunt. That evening, Marcus joined a local volunteer group for a coordinated hunt along the river corridor. Unlike thrill seekers, these hunters worked with wildlife officials, focusing on whole sounder removal. They set up a corral trap the size of a tennis court, baiting it with fermented corn that gave off a sour, irresistible aroma. As night fell, Marcus checked the infrared cameras. The darkness came alive in shades of green and black, armadillos, raccoons, and finally the unmistakable shapes of hogs. One by one they approached, cautious at first, then crowding inside the trap. "Patience," whispered the team leader through the earpiece. "We need the entire group before the gate drops." Minutes stretched. The hogs milled, grunted, jostled. At last the final stragglers entered. The leader hit the remote. With a metallic clang, the gate swung shut. A storm of squeals erupted, loud enough to make the trees tremble. Marcus felt a knot in his stomach. Relief mixed with the grim understanding that this was just one sounder among thousands. River of Stories. Across the river, 74-year-old storyteller Geraldine Jerry Ross sat on her porch, listening to the distant commotion. Her family had lived by the Canadian for 5 generations. She remembered when the river corridor was known more for catfish derbies than midnight hunts. Grandpa used to say the river talks if you sit quiet, Jerry said, rocking gently. These hogs, they're part of that story now, whether we like it or not. She recalled summer nights when lightning bugs danced over the water and coyotes yipped at the moon. Now the soundtrack included helicopters and rifle cracks. It changes a place, she sighed, when the fight never stops. Economic tides. The next day in Norman. Agricultural economist, Dr. Raj Patel addressed a packed county extension meeting. Charts flickered on a projector screen, each line sloping relentlessly upward. Statewide damage estimates now exceed $200 million annually, Raj said. Crops, fences, equipment, even tourism. Every sector feels the strain. He pointed to a map dotted with red. Notice how the river corridors accelerate spread. Transportation routes, water, cover, perfect habitat. Containment here isn't just an environmental issue. It's an economic imperative. Farmers in the audience exchanged anxious looks. The numbers gave weight to what they already lived daily. Night on the water. Later that week, Anika joined a nighttime patrol by airboat skimming across the moonlit river. The engine roared, sending ripples across the dark water. Spotlights probed the banks where pairs of orange eyes gleamed and vanished. Suddenly, the pilot cut the throttle and pointed. A massive boar stood half-submerged at the water's edge, muscles rippling beneath bristled hide. For a breathless moment, it held its ground, head high, then slipped silently into the reeds. Alpha male, Anika whispered. Easily 300 pounds. The encounter was a reminder. Despite datasets and management plans, the hogs remained powerful, adaptive, almost mythic in their presence. Underscore closing the day. As dawn approached, the patrol returned to the landing. Anika felt river. Mist on her face, a mix of exhaustion and determination settling over her. Each expedition gathered crucial data, yet the scale of the challenge loomed larger every week. On shore, Marcus waited with fresh reports from the previous night's successful corral trap. They exchanged weary smiles, comrades in a long campaign that would not end soon. Another chapter, Marcus said. Another, Anika agreed, gazing back at the silver ribbon of water. The river keeps flowing. So do they. And so do we. The river corridor stormfront. By late afternoon, a line of thunderheads rolled in from the west, darkening the Canadian River like ink spilled across the sky. The airboat crew secured their gear, while distant lightning stitched jagged seams along the horizon. Anika and Malik packed their samples as warm rain began to fall, fat drops that carried the earthy scent of river mud and crushed leaves. For a few minutes, the forest exhaled, cooled and hushed. Then the storm arrived in full. Sheets of rain rattled the cottonwoods, and the river swelled with a low, urgent roar. In that instant, Anika understood again why the hogs flourished here. Water and cover, endless and renewing. Damage control. The next morning, the rain had turned pastures into shallow lakes. Sheriff Paula Wright toured flood-prone farms with a small convoy of county vehicles. Feral hog prints crisscrossed the fresh mud, proof the animals had moved freely during the storm, slipping through weakened fences and drowned-out barriers. Paula knelt near a mangled gate, the metal bent as though by a battering ram. She photographed the damage for the insurance report, though she knew the numbers barely captured the frustration. These animals treat steel like straw, she muttered. Beside her, rancher Nora Kim shook her head. They were here while we slept. Same as always. You can't outweight them. They move with the weather. An unexpected alliance. That evening, Marcus joined a community meeting at Purcell's town hall. Farmers, scientists, and local officials crowded the wooden benches. At the front, a quiet man in camouflage introduced himself as Thomas Gray, a member of the Chickasaw Nation Wildlife Division. Our elders taught us to respect every creature, Thomas said, but also to keep balance. When one species threatens the rest, we act. We've used traditional tracking for generations. It's time to combine that knowledge with modern tools. He unfurled a hand-drawn map showing hog movement patterns along ancestral trails. The routes mirrored Annika's data almost exactly. Annika leaned forward, intrigued. Would you collaborate on a joint survey? Thomas smiled. Balance requires many hands. We're ready. The room buzzed with cautious hope. For the first time that night, solutions felt tangible. Midnight encounter. 2 days later, Annika joined Thomas and Marcus for a nocturnal tracking expedition. The team moved silently through the damp forest, guided by moonlight and Thomas's unerring sense of direction. He stopped suddenly, raising a hand. A guttural grunt echoed from the underbrush. Through the night vision's scope, they spotted a massive boar accompanied by a half-dozen sows, their piglets weaving like shadows between tree trunks. Marcus steadied his rifle, but lowered it at Thomas's quiet gesture. Not tonight, Thomas whispered. Let them show the path. They trailed the sounder for nearly a mile, recording GPS coordinates, noting water sources and escape routes. Every detail would help plan a larger, more strategic capture. Dawn at the crossing. As first light filtered through mist, the hogs disappeared into a maze of willow thickets near a natural ford. The team lingered on a bluff overlooking the river. Sunrise painted the water in hues of rose and copper, beautiful and indifferent. Annika felt a surge of resolve. This crossing could be key, she said. Block it and we funnel movement for future operations. Thomas nodded. Our people call this place the Bend of Echoes. It remembers every footstep. Now it remembers them too. They stood in thoughtful silence, the river's steady murmur a reminder of time beyond human measure. Economics of persistence. Later that week, Dr. Raj Patel met with state legislators in Oklahoma City. He laid out spreadsheets that glittered with sobering figures. Crop destruction, livestock losses, infrastructure repairs, approaching $250 million annually. One truth is unavoidable, Raj told the committee. Without sustained statewide funding and cooperation, the cost will double within a decade. We can invest in prevention, or we can keep paying for disaster. The room absorbed his words with uneasy stillness. Policy, like the river, moved slowly, but the hogs did not. Life along the river. Jerry Ross hosted an evening gathering on her porch. Neighbors brought pies and guitars, and as the sun set, music drifted across the darkening water. Children chased fireflies, while elders traded stories. Jerry strummed a gentle chord. The river has carried many songs, she said, and it carries ours. Tonight, whatever the hogs take, they can't take this. Her words threaded through the music, a quiet defiance, more enduring than fences or rifles. Closing. Near midnight, Annika drove home along Highway 77, windows down to the cool river breeze. She replayed the night's discoveries. The hidden crossing, Thomas's ancestral knowledge, the tentative partnerships forming like new tributaries. The hogs remained, cunning and unstoppable for now, yet she sensed a shift. Not victory, but momentum. A gathering of people who refused to yield. As she crossed the bridge over the Canadian, moonlight shimmered on the restless current. The river whispered its endless story, and Anika whispered back, a promise carried in the dark. We will keep trying.